Good morning, everybody, and welcome to day 2 of our remote learning adventure. You guys have been doing great with this so far, so I really just want to encourage you to keep it up. I'm the one who's been having the tech issues. I think I've ironed all that out, so the Zoom call tonight should be fine. I'm going to try to sign on a little early, so that way I can see you guys coming in, and if there's any issues, send out an email in a timely fashion. All right, but you guys have been doing great with it, so keep it up. So we're on the next 2 pages of Promises to Keep, the story about Jackie Robinson written by his daughter. Today you're going to learn a little more about Jackie's background and the background of his family and why him breaking that racial barrier in baseball was really such an important thing. You're going to hear more of the history, and it's interesting because it actually ties our Civil War unit to this book. All right, and there's a lot of time that passed in between the two things there. All right, so you're going to see the end of the Civil War and the outlash of that and how that rolls all the way up to really the present day, but to this time in Jackie Robinson's life around the 40s where the civil rights movement really starts to get its footing. All right, and again, this is where you start to hear about folks like Martin Luther King. All right. So today I'm going to do a read along. All right, we're going to look at some photos together. I want you guys just to continue with our organizer from yesterday. And then there's a timeline, and I want you to pull some details out of that. So you're working on 2 different organizers, just like we do in our notebooks. And we're going to add 1 word, that's it, to our glossary, but it's a big one. All right, so I really want to make sure you have some space for this because we're going to come through and build on this definition as time goes on. All right, so here we go. So we're going to start on page 8. And I'm reading that to you now. So, a black and white world. My grandparents were my great-grandparents were slaves. My grandmother was a sharecropper. My father was born into a segregated world. Although it may be hard for you to imagine, in America where black and white people were kept apart by laws and customs, that world existed. My father helped change it. By breaking the color barrier in Major League Baseball, my father helped break down racial segregation. Before we get into the story of Jackie Robinson, however, we need to understand how segregation became a way of life in the United States. So, I want you to take a minute just to add to that glossary. We're going to write the word segregation. All right, and again, that's a big one. We're going to hear that a lot. I think you guys have an idea of what it is, but we're going to be building on that definition. The story of race relations in the United States begins more than 400 years ago, when African men, women, and children were enslaved and forcibly brought to the American colonies. The Civil War from 1861 to 1865 ended this terrible, inhumane practice. By 1870, there were approximately 4 million African Americans in the United States who, because of the 13th and 14th Amendments to the Constitution, were now U.S. citizens. All right, so we're still kind of in our Civil War unit. We're closing it out. Today you're actually going to see, you'll be looking into the Lincoln assassination. So that's at the aftermath of the war. But you can see how these two kind of interact, all right? And that's why we decided to do the units this way. As freedmen and women, some former slaves attended school for the first time, farmed in a system called sharecropping, voted, and held local, state, and federal offices. But the new freedoms granted to the African Americans were unacceptable to many Southern whites who were used to being in control. These Southerners used political, legal, and violent means to control blacks. They passed state laws to restrict the rights of blacks and to keep them from voting. Even the courts denied blacks opportunities and basic human rights. In Plessy v. Ferguson in 1896, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the state's right to pass racial segregation laws. The Supreme Court's ruling said that such laws did not violate the U.S. Constitution. The nation was divided, those favoring segregation against those who opposed it. The period of legal segregation in America is completely referred to as the Jim Crow era. In the 1830s, Thomas Rice, a famous white music hall entertainer in Baltimore, Maryland, created a fictional character based on a black singer-dancer. Rice called his character Jim Crow. White audiences laughed at the clowning and foolish antics of the character. Black people found the performances demeaning. They began to use the term Jim Crow to mean discrimination. All right, and that word demeaning, we don't necessarily have to add it to our glossary, but just know that it's kind of like a mean way demeaning, right? It breaks your character down. It's making fun of people. All right, so I want to look at these photos. All right, you guys have these yourself. Just kind of a close look. I know the lights are a little weird in my home. Sorry. So these are slave quarters. All right. Think back to when we did the gallery walk, and the same kind of conditions that you're seeing. Right. We had those immigrants in New York City living in tough conditions. All right. From what I can see here. All right, it looks like we might even have something like an open sewer system, which is not good. It smells bad and is bad for you. Dangerous. All right, people are sitting outside because I don't think they really have any porches or anywhere to lounge, like living rooms, things like that. These homes are going to be bare bones. Actually, I had a chance to just go to former slave quarters when I was in New Orleans in Louisiana. There is a popular kind of house called a shotgun house, and it's really just you open the front door, you walk in, there's a little sitting area, bedroom to the left, kitchen to the right, bathroom, and that's it. Then you're back in the backyard. So there's really no frills. Think like Hooverville, all right? A little nicer than that, but not too much. Now here, this image, you guys are probably looking at like, what the heck is going on here? Now, you can see this is a drawing, all right? What we call a lithograph. So back then, you'd etch into rubber and it would print because we didn't have like copy machines like we do these days, right? So it was a cheaper way to do that. And so you'll see etchings are the way this art was done, all right? And down here we have music notes. So this is that character, the Jim Crow, the one that the dance hall was making fun of or using to make fun of African-American people. But this whole document, what we'd refer to this as a historic artifact because it's actually, this is just a reproduction, but it's actually from the time. And it's something that people would have used, and that's what makes it an artifact. So it's historical because it's actually from the 19th century, and because it was actually used, it's what actually makes it an artifact. All right? So what I want you guys to do now, all right? I've read that once out to you. We're going to go through the timeline together, all right? And then I'm going to show you what I've done with my notes. And you're going to build on that, and we'll go over it tonight in Zoom. And also what we were going to do mostly last night. We did the vocabulary, but I want to finish up with the questions because, you know, I know we were having connectivity issues. So down here, across the bottom, is a timeline. And I know you guys know what a timeline is, all right? Always follow them chronologically because it kind of tells a story as we move along. And this is going to tell the story of African Americans, black people, and their migration to the United States and everything that happened to them, kind of setting the background for Jackie Robinson's life. So in 1619, we have people kidnapped from Africa or brought to the Virginia colonies. In 1776, there were approximately 2 million slaves in the American colonies. After the Revolution, all right, ends in 1783, approximately 55,000 free black people live in what is now the United States. By 1787, the U.S. Constitution does not mention slavery, but it does ban the importation of slaves as of 1808. So that means no more slaves after 1808 can be brought into the United States. The Civil War rages between the Union and the North and the Confederacy, the South, all right? We know this, right? We've been talking about this for the last few weeks. So that goes from 1861 to 1865. And in history, you're going to be looking at that very end today. In 1863, all right, so you see how there's a little bit of a jump because this is the span of the whole war. But in 1863, during that war, President Abraham Lincoln signs the Emancipation Proclamation, which frees slaves in the Confederate States. And remember, we talked about this, that if those slaves were then to escape, they could join the Union Army and buffer up and build the Union Army. And that's part of what gives the Union such an advantage towards the end of the war. By 1865, the 13th Amendment to the Constitution makes slavery illegal everywhere in the United States. That is the very thing that most people remember the impact of the Civil War being. The official end of slavery throughout the United States. In 1868, the 14th Amendment guarantees all people born in the United States, including African Americans, citizenship and equal protection under the law. Native Americans are not included. All right, and you'll see that women, all right, women's suffrage, which means voting, is also something that women still need to fight for at this point. And in 1870, the 15th Amendment grants all adult male citizens the right to vote. So there we have our Native American men able to vote. But the key there is all male citizens. All right, so a civil rights movement for women is still underway for the women's suffrage movement, the right for women to be able to vote as well. So what I'd like you guys to do, all right, we have our glossary. I want you to add segregation, and you're going to use just a quick reread between 8 and 9 to help come up with your own definition of segregation, and leave some space, because this is a word we're going to revisit and kind of work on the definition as we go through this book. And just know that it's a key to this book. It's a very, very important piece of it. And now, I want you guys to make a very, very simple graphic organizer where in the left-hand column, all right, we have our text. So this is the timeline, which we just went over. And then here is really just all the writing that's on page 8 and 9. All right, so that's just a black and white world, that chapter, okay? So you're going to try to pull out the main idea. Think like gist statement for each, all right? So for the timeline, you could look at the main idea for the whole thing, or you can pull it out piece by piece and show me the supporting details. I think it's easier to kind of look at it as a whole and tell me what you think the main idea is. So for me, an example of that would be, you know, the story or history of African Americans in the United States. All right, and then in supporting details, I could actually pull pieces right from the actual timeline. So, example being, you know, we got over here, people kidnapped from Africa are brought to the Virginia colony. All right, 1776, there were approximately 2 million slaves in the American colonies. That's a good detail, all right? So by 1776, 2 million slaves in America. All right, and you're just kind of organizing those details. That's really all there is to it, all right? Now, for the next piece, you'd just be going through the body of these 2 pages and doing the same thing. You're kind of pulling out a gist statement, the main idea of what these pages are about, and what you use to kind of show you that, all right? And that's really all there is to it. So I want to go over what we did yesterday. I just want to clear up any questions with that, make sure everybody's got their technology stuff in order, myself included, all right? And then we'll do a deeper dive into this next week, but I wanted to kind of make sure we're all on the same page, touch base, get all our vocabulary ironed out, and I think we'll be in good shape, you know, to lead into next week, all right? So I hope you guys are enjoying the book so far, all right? In a few minutes, I'm going to post the instructions to the history web quest, which is about Abraham Lincoln's assassination, and you'll see it kind of has videos for you to lead through and some questions to answer. But I'll just kind of give you a little taste of it right now. And then I'll email and send that via class tag. So if you're not getting one or the other, let me know, and that way I can just iron out my email list and make sure I got everybody signed up for class tag. All right? Good luck, guys, and I look forward to talking to you at 4:30 on Zoom.